Deep within Earth's last military stronghold, Commander Arya Winters stood before a holographic display of the approaching Cathari fleet. Her dark eyes reflected the blue glow of countless enemy ships, but instead of fear, a slight smile played across her face. The bunker's command center hummed with activity as officers rushed to their stations, preparing for what most believed would be humanity's final stand. "You're smiling again, Commander," Lieutenant James Rodriguez noted, his voice carrying a mix of concern and curiosity. "The same way you did before we took back Singapore." Arya's smile widened as she adjusted the carved wooden pendant hanging from her neck, a stark contrast to the advanced technology surrounding them. "The Cathari think they understand us, James. That's their first mistake." She waved her hand through the hologram, zooming in on the alien flagship. "They've conquered 3/4 of Earth using superior technology and perfect logic. They expect us to fight the same way we have been, with increasingly desperate conventional tactics." The command center's massive screens showed endless streams of data, troop movements, weapon capabilities, and battle predictions. Every analytical model showed the same result: humanity's defeat within hours of the Cathari's planned assault. "What they don't understand," Arya continued, walking around the tactical table, "is that humans are at their most dangerous when they're backed into a corner. Not because we become more aggressive, but because we become more creative." She pressed a button, bringing up a new hologram, a detailed map of their defense network that looked deceptively simple. Colonel Diana Patel, their chief of operations, approached with a tablet displaying the latest intelligence. "The Cathari have updated their neural networks again. They're certain they've accounted for every possible human response." She paused, noting Arya's continued smile. "But that's what you're counting on, isn't it?" Arya nodded, reaching for the wooden pendant again, a habit her staff had learned meant she was about to reveal something unexpected. "The Cathari's greatest weakness isn't in their technology, it's in their understanding of humanity. They see our emotions as primitive, our laughter as a sign of mental instability, our ability to find joy in darkness as a defect." She pulled up another display, this one showing the modifications they'd made to their defense systems over the past month. To an outside observer, they might look like desperate last-minute changes. But each alteration had been carefully planned, each apparent weakness deliberately engineered. "Do you know what happens when you take a species that relies entirely on logic and technology, and expose them to something they can't quantify?" Arya asked, looking around at her senior staff. "Their neural networks try to analyze it, try to find patterns where there are none. And when they fail..." Her smile grew wider, reminding her officers of a chess master about to reveal a brilliant move. Lieutenant Rodriguez studied the defense plans, his eyes widening as he began to understand. "You're not planning to outfight them. You're planning to break their minds. The Cathari think they're facing humanity's last, desperate resistance," Arya confirmed, bringing up the final piece of their strategy. "Instead, they're walking into humanity's first real counterattack. Their neural networks connect every soldier, sharing tactical information instantly. But what happens when what they're sharing isn't tactical data, but pure, unquantifiable human chaos?" Around the room, understanding began to dawn on the faces of her staff. The defensive positions that seemed random suddenly showed their true purpose. The apparent gaps in their security took on new meaning. Everything they had prepared was designed not to stop the Cathari, but to confuse, disorient, and ultimately break them. "They've spent months analyzing our battle strategies, our weapons, our conventional responses," Arya continued, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "But they've never bothered to analyze our music, our art, our laughter. They dismissed these as primitive expressions of an inferior species." She straightened up, looking each of her officers in the eye. "Today, we show them just how wrong they've been." Warning klaxons began to sound as the first wave of Cathari ships entered the outer defense perimeter. But unlike previous battles, there was no panic in the command center. Instead, an almost electric sense of anticipation filled the air. "All units, prepare to execute Operation Pandora," Arya commanded, her voice steady and sure. "Remember, people, when everything goes crazy out there, that's not a sign that we're losing. That's a sign that we're winning." As her troops moved to their positions, Arya touched the wooden pendant one last time. It had belonged to her grandmother, who had taught her that the greatest strength often lies not in the ability to overpower, but in the ability to endure, adapt, and find joy even in the darkest moments. The Cathari were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The first Cathari drop ships pierced through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their advanced stealth systems making them nearly invisible to conventional detection methods. Inside the command center, Commander Arya Winters watched their descent with the same enigmatic smile that had unnerved her staff earlier. "Stealth systems active, neural network synchronized," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, reading from the enemy communications they'd managed to intercept. "They're moving exactly as you predicted, Commander." "Of course they are," Arya replied, her fingers absently touching her grandmother's pendant. "The Cathari military doctrine hasn't changed in 3 centuries. Why would it? Until now, it's never failed them." The alien ships deployed their troops in a perfect geometric pattern, each landing zone calculated to provide optimal coverage and support. Their soldiers moved with mechanical precision, their movements coordinated through their neural network to an extent that would have been impossible for unaugmented humans. Colonel Patel's voice came through the command channel. "Enemy forces are approaching the outer defensive line. All units report ready for Operation Pandora." Arya nodded, her smile growing wider. "Begin Phase 1. Let's show our visitors what happens when you try to quantify the unquantifiable." Throughout the defensive perimeter, hidden speakers began broadcasting a carefully crafted mix of sounds. To human ears, it was a cacophony of music, laughter, and seemingly random noise. But to the Cathari neural networks, desperately trying to analyze and categorize every input, it was the beginning of a computational nightmare. "Enemy forces showing first signs of confusion," Rodriguez reported, excitement creeping into his voice. "Their neural networks are attempting to establish pattern recognition, and failing." On the tactical displays, the perfect geometric formations of the Cathari began to waver. Their neural networks, designed to process battlefield data and coordinate responses, were being overwhelmed by input they couldn't categorize or predict. "Now," Arya commanded, "deploy the emotive resonators." Across the battlefield, devices that looked like primitive sound speakers activated. But these weren't just broadcasting noise, they were projecting something the Cathari had never bothered to study: the electromagnetic patterns of human emotional states, particularly joy and laughter. The effect was immediate and devastating. The alien neural networks, trying to process and respond to these patterns, began creating feedback loops of confusion and disorientation. Soldiers who had never experienced emotion without the filtering and dampening effects of their neural technology were suddenly being bombarded with pure human emotional resonance. "Enemy communications are becoming erratic," Rodriguez announced, barely containing his own excitement. "Their command structure is starting to fragment." Arya watched as the Cathari's perfect military formation dissolved into chaos. Some soldiers stood frozen, their neural networks overwhelmed by input they couldn't process. Others moved in random directions, their coordinated battlefield awareness shattered by the emotional bombardment. "Phase 2, she ordered. "Deploy the mirror arrays." Across the battlefield, panels that had appeared to be simple defensive barriers suddenly activated, creating a complex network of reflected and refracted light. To the Cathari's enhanced visual sensors, it created an ever-shifting maze of visual data that their neural networks frantically tried to analyze and categorize. "Commander," Colonel Patel's voice held a note of awe, "they're actually starting to laugh. The Cathari soldiers, some of them are laughing." Arya nodded, understanding the significance. "Their neural networks are breaking down. Without the filters and controls they've relied on for centuries, they're experiencing raw emotion for the first time. And like any sentient being experiencing joy for the first time, they're laughing. The tactical displays showed the Cathari invasion force in complete disarray. Their perfectly coordinated attack had transformed into chaos as their greatest strength. Their interconnected neural network became their greatest vulnerability. Launch Phase 3, Arya commanded. Let's show them what humanity's really capable of. As the human forces began their counterattack, they moved not with the mechanical precision of the Cathari, but with the fluid adaptability that had allowed humanity to survive countless challenges. They fought not as programmable units, but as individuals united by purpose and spirit. And as they advanced, their laughter, genuine, joyous, and utterly human, spread across the battlefield like a contagion, infecting even the Cathari troops with its inexplicable power. The aliens' neural networks, unable to process or control this cascade of emotional response, began shutting down one by one. Victory, Arya realized, wouldn't come from superior firepower or technology. It would come from reminding the Cathari of something their civilization had forgotten centuries ago, the raw, uncontrollable power of genuine emotion, and the strength that comes not from suppressing it, but from embracing it fully. High Commander Rectal stood aboard the Cathari flagship Eternal Logic, his crystalline eyes fixed on the tactical displays showing the unprecedented chaos unfolding below. 3 centuries of military service had not prepared him for this moment, watching his perfect invasion force crumble before what his analysts had dismissed as primitive psychological warfare. Impossible, he muttered, his secondary breathing chambers fluttering in agitation. Run another diagnostic on the neural network. High Commander, First Analyst Velenar approached, her usual composed demeanor showing signs of strain. This is the 7th diagnostic in the past hour. The network itself is functioning perfectly, that's the problem. It's transmitting everything. Around them, the flagship's command center hummed with increasing tension as more reports flooded in from the surface. The humans weren't just holding their ground, they were advancing, using tactics that defied every strategic principle in the Cathari military doctrine. Show me the command carrier, rational thought, Rectal ordered, focusing on one of his most experienced unit leaders. The holographic display shifted, revealing a scene that made his primary heart stutter. The elite troops aboard the carrier were experiencing something unprecedented, they were laughing. The human emotional resonance, Velenar explained, her voice tight with suppressed anxiety, it's not just affecting our ground forces. It's propagating through the neural network, infecting even ships in high orbit. The humans aren't just broadcasting emotions, they're somehow weaponizing our own experience of them. A new alert flashed across the tactical displays. The human commander who had orchestrated this chaos, Arya Winters, was broadcasting on all frequencies, her message breaking through their most sophisticated encryption as if it didn't exist. By now, her voice carried an undertone that made Rectal's threat glands pulse uncomfortably. You're probably wondering how a supposedly primitive species managed to turn your greatest strength against you. The answer is simple, you never bothered to understand us. You saw our emotions as weakness, our laughter as a defect, our joy as a flaw in need of correction. Rectal watched in mounting horror as more of his forces succumbed to the human psychological assault. Ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds were now hanging motionless in space, their crews paralyzed by the cascade of unfamiliar sensations flooding through their neural networks. Shut it down, he commanded. Sever all neural connections. We can't, Velenar's composed facade finally cracked. The network, it's evolving. The human emotional patterns are causing it to rewrite its own protocols. It's not just transmitting tactical data anymore, it's transmitting pure, unfiltered experience. On the surface, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Human forces moved with an organic fluidity that made their actions impossible to predict. Their weapons, seemingly primitive by Cathari standards, were being deployed in ways that turned the aliens' own technology against them. They're not just fighting us, Velenar realized, her analytical mind finally grasping the full scope of their predicament. They're teaching us something we forgot. Something we suppressed centuries ago when we first developed the neural networks. A new wave of laughter rippled through the fleet, stronger than before. Rektal watched as his own bridge crew began to show signs of infection, twitching mandibles, irregular breathing patterns, and the most terrifying symptom of all, spontaneous emotional expression. Full retreat, he ordered, but even as the words left his primary speech organ, he knew it was too late. The humans had turned their own neural network into a delivery system for something the Cathari had evolved away from generations ago, pure, unfiltered emotional experience. Commander Winter's voice came through again, this time carrying a tone that their most sophisticated cultural analysts couldn't categorize. You thought you could quantify every aspect of warfare, reduce it to algorithms and probability matrices. But you forgot the most fundamental truth about conflict: it's not just about technology or tactics. It's about spirit, about the indefinable qualities that make us who we are. Through the command center's viewport, Rektal watched as human ships rose from the surface, their seemingly chaotic formation somehow more effective than his own fleet's precisely calculated patterns. They weren't just surviving, they were turning the tide of a war that all logic said they should have lost. The network, Velenar whispered, her voice filled with something dangerously close to awe, it's not just transmitting their emotions anymore. It's learning from them. Evolving. Our own technology is being transformed by exposure to human consciousness. Rektal realized, with growing clarity, that they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this conflict. They had prepared to fight a technologically inferior species, but instead found themselves facing an enemy that had turned their own evolutionary choices into a weapon against them. Commander Arya Winters stood at the helm of the Earth ship Resilient Spirit, watching as her unprecedented counteroffensive unfolded across the battle space. What had begun as a desperate defensive strategy had evolved into something revolutionary, a new form of warfare that the Cathari's advanced technology couldn't counter. "Status report," she called out, her voice steady despite the excitement coursing through the command center. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now operating from the ship's tactical station, couldn't keep the grin off his face. The emotional resonance cascade is spreading through their entire fleet. Their neural network isn't just failing, it's actively working against them. Every attempt they make to re-establish control just makes the effect stronger. On the main view screen, the massive Cathari vessels hung in disarray, their perfect formation shattered. Some ships drifted aimlessly, their crews overwhelmed by the flood of unfamiliar sensations. Others moved in erratic patterns, their navigational systems confused by conflicting emotional data flooding through their networks. Colonel Patel, Arya activated the ship-to-ship comm. "How are our ground forces progressing?" "Better than we could have hoped, Commander," Patel's voice carried a note of triumph. "The Cathari ground forces are completely disorganized. Some are actually joining us, their neural networks have adapted to emotional input in ways their leadership never anticipated." Arya nodded, her hand touching her grandmother's pendant. The wooden artifact seemed oddly warm, as if responding to the unprecedented events unfolding around them. "Begin Phase 4, she ordered. "Let's show them what humanity's truly capable of." Across the battlefield, human forces began implementing the most audacious part of Arya's strategy. Instead of trying to destroy the Cathari technology, they began interfacing with it, using the aliens' own neural network as a conduit for something the Cathari had never expected: human consciousness. "Ma'am," Rodriguez called out, his voice filled with wonder, "you need to see this. The Cathari ships, their crews are starting to broadcast on our frequencies." The first transmission came from a Cathari battle cruiser. Its commander, speaking in halting tones, expressed something unprecedented in their species' history: genuine emotion. We understand now. What we dismissed as primitive, it's not weakness. It's something else. Something we lost." More transmissions followed, each one revealing the profound transformation sweeping through the Cathari forces. Their rigid military hierarchy, maintained for centuries through technological suppression of emotion, was dissolving in the face of rediscovered feelings. They're not just experiencing emotions, Colonel Patel observed through the calm, they're remembering them. Their neural network, it's accessing ancestral memories, experiences their species archived and tried to delete generations ago. Arya watched as the tactical display shifted, showing the unprecedented merger of human and Cathari forces. What had begun as an invasion was transforming into something else entirely, a revolution in the Cathari consciousness. "Commander," Rodriguez interrupted, his voice urgent, "the Cathari flagship is changing course. High Commander Rectal is attempting to rally his remaining loyal forces for a final assault." As expected, Arya replied, her smile unwavering. "They always fall back on their programming when threatened. Signal all ships, prepare for the final phase." The resilient spirit moved into position, leading a combined fleet of human vessels and converted Cathari ships. Above them, the massive form of the Eternal Logic loomed, its weapons powered but its crew visibly struggling with the cascade of emotions flooding through their neural network. "This isn't just about winning a war anymore," Arya broadcast to all ships, both human and Cathari. "This is about remembering what it means to be truly alive." The Cathari didn't lose their emotions through natural evolution, they suppressed them, buried them under layers of technology and logic. "Today, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting to remind an entire civilization of what they've lost." The combined fleet moved in perfect synchronization, but not with the mechanical precision of Cathari military doctrine. Instead, they moved with the fluid grace of beings guided by both intellect and emotion, their actions unpredictable yet purposeful. As they closed in on the Eternal Logic, Arya reflected on how far they'd come. What had started as Earth's last stand had become something far more significant, the awakening of an entire species to the power of their own forgotten nature. The final battle was about to begin, but it would be fought not with weapons alone, but with the full spectrum of human experience, determination, courage, joy, and most importantly, the ability to find strength in emotions that the Cathari had dismissed as weaknesses. The Eternal Logic hung against the backdrop of Earth's atmosphere, its imposing silhouette a testament to Cathari technological superiority. Yet within its halls, High Commander Rectal faced a crisis unlike any in their species' history. His crew, exposed to the full force of human emotional resonance, was fracturing, not just in their military discipline, but in their very understanding of existence. "Fire on the human fleet," he ordered, his voice carrying an unfamiliar tremor. "Execute combat pattern Sigma 7. But the ships under his command moved with hesitation, their crews caught between centuries of conditioning and newly awakened feelings they couldn't suppress. The human fleet, led by the resilient spirit, advanced not in the rigid patterns of traditional space combat, but in a fluid dance that seemed to defy tactical analysis. Aboard her ship, Commander Arya Winters watched the final pieces of her strategy fall into place. "All ships, initiate the Harmony Protocol," she commanded. "Let's show them what real unity looks like." The combined human and converted Cathari fleet began broadcasting on all frequencies, not just communication signals, but the full spectrum of human emotional experience. Music, laughter, joy, determination, hope, all flowing through the neural network that had once been the Cathari's greatest strength. "High Commander," First Analyst Velenar's voice cracked with emotion she no longer tried to suppress, "the network, it's not just transmitting anymore. It's singing." Rectal watched in astonishment as his flagship systems began responding to patterns he'd never seen before. The neural network, designed to coordinate military operations with cold efficiency, was now pulsing with rhythms that matched the beating of hearts, both human and Cathari. "Commander Winters," he found himself broadcasting, "what have you done to us?" Arya's response came not just through the communication channels, but through the transformed neural network itself, carrying with it the warmth of her smile. "We haven't done anything to you, High Commander. We've done something for you. We've reminded you of something your species tried to forget, that true strength comes not from suppressing what makes us alive, but from embracing it. Throughout the eternal logic, crew members began experiencing something that had been bred out of their species generations ago: spontaneous, genuine laughter. Not the calculated response to social cues their neural networks had been programmed to provide, but real, uncontrolled expressions of joy. You see, Arya continued, her voice carrying the wisdom her grandmother had passed down through the wooden pendant she wore, warfare isn't just about destroying your enemy. Sometimes, it's about helping them remember who they really are. The flagship's weapons powered down as its crew, one by one, surrendered not to defeat, but to transformation. The neural network that had once enforced rigid conformity now hummed with the full spectrum of conscious experience, logic and emotion, technology and spirit, working in harmony rather than opposition. High Commander Rectal, standing amidst the joyful chaos of his command center, finally understood. His people hadn't evolved beyond emotion, they had imprisoned themselves in a cage of pure logic, mistaking control for advancement. The humans hadn't just defeated them, they had set them free. Commander Winters, he broadcast, his voice carrying unfamiliar but welcome warmth, I believe it's time we discussed peace terms. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as species who might learn from each other. Arya smiled, touching her grandmother's pendant one last time. I think that can be arranged, High Commander. After all, the best victories aren't the ones that end in destruction, but in understanding. As the combined fleet moved into formation around the eternal logic, human and Cathari crews working together in unprecedented harmony, Arya reflected on how far they'd come. What had started as Earth's desperate last stand had become something far more significant, the beginning of a new chapter in the history of both species. You know what the really funny thing is? Lieutenant Rodriguez commented, watching the celebrations spreading across both fleets. We won this war not by being stronger or more advanced, but by being more human. That's always been our real strength, Arya replied, looking out at the earth shining below them. Not our technology, not our weapons, but our ability to feel, to laugh, to find joy even in our darkest moments. And now, thanks to us, the Cathari are remembering how to do the same. The war that had threatened to end humanity had instead awakened something long dormant in their adversaries. As human laughter mingled with newly remembered Cathari expressions of joy, a new age began, one where emotion and logic, heart and mind, technology and spirit would work together rather than in opposition. And somewhere, in the depths of space, the last reverberations of human laughter continued to spread through the vast neural networks of the Cathari Empire, awakening more and more of their kind to the power and beauty of their own forgotten nature.